Hamjambo, welcome back. This is the son of Ahset with my new program entitled The Son of Ahset Commentary. I've been gone a while, but now I've decided to start a new series of recordings discussing the blog The Lumumba Afrika Report. This is a blog where I post articles, and I have been somewhat disappointed that I have not been contacted by more talk show hosts for interviews about some of the articles I've written here. I was on one gentleman's show, and I am appreciative of that. But other than that one appearance, it seems like this blog has not seen the traffic that I feel it deserves. Not because I'm some great writer or anything like that. It's just I feel the issues that I discuss are important issues that should be discussed more widely and specifically within the, for lack of a better term, African nationalist community. So, on this, the premiere episode, I'll be reviewing one of my more popular articles, which is entitled Why Mulattoes and Other Hybrids Are Not African. The subtitle, or If Jesus' Color Doesn't Matter, Why Was It Necessary to Depict Him as White? This article was published in June of 2014. And I'll just go quickly through the main points of this article and give my short commentary and discuss what I think is a perennial issue among African people, because I think we have severe social and political misorientations that should be rectified sooner rather than later, given the present geopolitical realities on the globe. So, I begin the article by revealing that it took me a while to actually accept this conclusion. I did not originally hold the view that only people with two African parents and who have physical and biological African traits should be categorized as African. I previously held the view, like most people raised in the United States of African descent, that the one drop rule, a rule which states that if a person has one drop of African blood, then they are in fact African. It took a few people to convince me otherwise. One of them was a YouTuber who made videos from Azania, and he discussed this issue. There were others and some other bloggers, and I'll put some links in the description box about where you can learn more about this issue, but I originally held the traditional view. I had a debate with this YouTuber in question, and I realized that what he was saying was actually correct. Now, most people would charge an individual who has this viewpoint as racist. And I address this in the article. I say, before you throw around the term racist, let me define the term as per my understanding. The terms racism and racist are actually misnomers. In fact, the rise of the usage in these terms didn't accelerate until the middle part of the 20th century. Previously, people really didn't utilize the term racism as much. So they are created terms for accomplishing a political goal. I think the phenomenon, which is inaccurately referred to as racism or a person being racist, should more accurately be termed ethnocentric economic protectionism. Ethnocentric economic protectionism for the purposes of seeking, securing, and wielding wealth and power. Now, understandably, with this term, people would object because with the use of the former term, racist or racism, it deftly conceals the true nature of the phenomenon and makes confused, naive, unsuspecting people believe that anyone can be racist because they treat someone of another race or genocultural group rudely, or they make disparaging comments about them. So just to tease this out a little bit, people use this term racist and racism as a pejorative. When someone maybe calls someone a name or does something socially which slights another person in some way. My argument is this activity is wrongly conflated with the process of securing and distributing resources to people of a definable genocultural group or race. Therefore, if a particular genocultural group or race has control and access to a particular resource, and they decide to distribute that to people within that racial or genocultural group exclusively, this is an economic necessity carried out for the survival of that group, which is why I call it ethnocentric economic protectionism for the purposes of seeking, securing, and wielding wealth and power. Now, when a person who is not a member of that genocultural or racial group attempts to receive said resources and they are denied, it is then purported that an individual from the resource holding group is a racist or is practicing racism. My point is that that is one economic reality of the modern world. Hence, from that control of the resources, particular political realities or laws are put into place which extend to other social interactions. Therefore, not only are resources denied to a non-member of that group, social interaction is regulated and limited based on that group's control of the resources. Now, we have conflated, for example, a white person saying to a black person, I will not hire you because you're black, and a white person saying to a black person, I will not marry you because you're black, or I will not sit next to you on a bus because you are black. Now, these are different acts which are derived from an economic power position, but are not necessarily directly related to the distribution of the resources controlled by the group in power. In other words, the fact that I cannot get a job within the white collective is an economic sanction. But the fact that I cannot marry or sit next to a white person in these other social interactions is really much less of an issue than the issue of not controlling or having access to the resources of economic control. And it is my contention that access to resources of economic control outweigh any social slight that one receives. In fact, African people should not even be focusing on supposed social slights. We should be focusing on how can we develop ourselves economically so that we can have the power to distribute resources to other African people and thereby start to make political recommendations in the form of laws to prevent non-African people from making a claim on our resources. And then this would extend to social relations, places where people can live, land people can buy, social interactions people have, including intimate relationships and marriage. So this is why I define racism and racist as such. So, moving on. I also decry the use of the term white supremacist and white supremacy. And I point out that these terms actually empower white people. Okay? The author, Dr. Marimba Ani, has created the term Utamaroho, which is the cultural spirit of a people. And since Europeans find extreme joy in having power over non-Europeans, using the term white supremacist and white supremacy actually emboldens and empowers them more. It does not shame them. Okay? I support the term white hegemony because white hegemony is an ideology that holds that whites are better, smarter, and more capable producers and managers of wealth than non-white people, and specifically those categorized as black. See, this is more accurate in my opinion because it actually describes the phenomenon under review. Dr. Kamal Kambon has come up with the term white world domination by terror, which is also appropriate in my opinion. Because in order to control resources and exact a political reality, you must use terroristic means to do so, to enforce that. So, because Europeans hold this ideology, in their mind, it justifies by any means necessary the total destruction of any successful model of development independent of whites or without white people leading, organizing, and directing it. And this logic of a racial hierarchical model proceeds downward, which has each subsequent racial group being more adept at this activity than the lower caste, mainly saying, okay, white people at the top, then next it's the Japanese or the Asians, and next, they got, I don't know, the East Indians or whatever, just in order to ensure that African people are at the bottom and to account for these other racial groups, they must conceive of the world in this way, in this hierarchical model. Okay, and you see this when they talk about the IQ disparity. And I won't get into the IQ right now, but that test is invalid. Okay, it's been proven invalid. Even the creators of the IQ assessment have stated that it's not a accurate measure of intelligence. Besides, intelligence is culturally defined. So, this ideology of white hegemony informs the system that is now masquerading as globalism. Globalism is a reformed white hegemonic system. Okay? So within this system, it is impossible for a non-white victim, especially Africans in particular, to be racist or practice racism. You cannot be a white supremacist. You cannot be a white hegemonist. You cannot participate in white ethnocentric economic protectionism or white world domination by terror in any way that ultimately benefits your existence within your own genocultural group and the group as a whole entity. So that's a lot, but I just want to say in simpler terms, that means yes, there are Clarence Thomases, yes, there are sellout Negroes, but their activity is not, quote, racist or, white supremacist, or even though their individual activity does hurt Africans as a group, it does not benefit that individual Clarence, Uncle Tom Kunaz, within the black group. Okay? So he cannot return to the African collective as a whole and benefit from his betrayal. He must stay married to his fat white wife and have his fake white friends. Do you see? So individually, maybe he will benefit, but not among the collective of Africans, and he cannot benefit the collective of African people by his supposed success. Therefore, he cannot be, in strictest terms, a racist. He can be against black people, he can be anti-black, he can hurt black people, he can be a traitor, but he is not a member of the group that holds the supreme power, the hegemonic power, more accurately put, if you understand what I mean. So this is, I think, an important distinction, so that when we conceive of the African nation, or a powerful African nation emerging on the African continent, we can carry with it the concept of the traitor. And so I promote jettisoning this term called racist and characterize what we're dealing with in political terms, in geopolitical terms. So that one, it gives us a focus on creating political power, and two, we can identify who is against us, no matter what their genocultural or racial classification is. So let's get into why mulattoes are not African. Mulattoes are genome terminator entities. They cannot reproduce themselves like their respective parents if they have mated with one of their own genocultural group. A mulatto must mate with another mulatto to produce themselves, or else their offspring reverts back to whichever genocultural group the mulatto has chosen to mate with. Or they create another hybridized offspring. Okay? Their genome pattern cannot maintain structural integrity because they are not natural. They are a product of the lascivious interaction between members of genocultural groups or racists who over tens of thousands of years have stabilized their genocultural, genotypical, and phenotypical makeup. So they're a new product. So they must, within the realm of this biological reality, succumb to the preponderance of genomic and genotypical features that are present in the mating pool. Okay? This is the strongest argument for why mulattoes are not African. Every other genocultural group on the planet knows this. That's why they've made social mores and legal provisions regulating intermarriage. The Arabs know this. I'll talk about the Hispanic slash Latinos a little bit later, but regarding the South Asian Indians, go check out a YouTube video called Dalit, the Black Untouchables of India by Dr. Velu, Annamalai. But you'll see in that video that, and I'll put a link in the description box, but that video is very similar to what I'll discuss with the Hispanic slash Latinos. Okay? Now, other genocultural groups never accept a hybrid as one of them. This does not mean that they treat the hybrid unkindly or should do so in all cases, nor does it mean that a hybrid cannot participate in economic or educational opportunities. However, at the level of strategic power, in which the lives and destiny of the genocultural group are at stake, hybrids have no place, no relevant voice in matters such as these, as they are not part of the genocultural group's genetic survival. This is an error we've made. I discussed in another blog entry that I'll do a recording on later about this coon Negro. His name is Seretse Khama. He was the president of Botswana, and he married a low-class white British secretary. This guy was part of the political ruling class of his home country. He was part of the royal line, and he decided to marry a secretary. There were no African women who were more capable, more attractive than this low-level, low-class white secretary? And hence he created some mulattoes, and now they're wreaking havoc on Botswana. Because he didn't understand this point. Hybrids have no place in the genetic survival of African people. So in Botswana, these hybrids are trying to create their own new royal class and ostracize other Africans in favor of their white family members who produce these hybrids in order to gain a foothold into your resource base. See, this is why I defined racism as I did. Ethnocentric economic protectionism. African people have assumed that because of racist, quote-unquote, practices of other genocultural groups to cast off their hybrids among us, even when they have been created among them but not fully accepted among them. Okay? And they have made rules about why they've done so, like the one-drop rule. We have felt an obligation to accept them, which has resulted in this non-exclusivity. Moreover, it's resulted in a failure to address who is African and who is not. And it's left us vulnerable. It has left us vulnerable to infiltration by hybrids and other non-Africans under the false claim that, oh, they're African because they were born in Africa, or they identify with Africans, or they have some distant ancestor who was raped. Okay? They cling to the out of Africa hypothesis that says, oh, all humans came from Africa, therefore I'm African too. Some Japanese person born in some distant village in Japan can come to Africa and claim that they're African too because of the out of Africa hypothesis. It's ridiculous, and we accept it with no critical review. We don't have a codified set of standards, rules, and regulations about who is African, which has exposed us to confused mulattoes who want a constituency because they don't have one, because they're mixed. They can't do it in the white community or the other non-African communities, so they come to the African community and claim they're African and try to get a constituency built. And other unscrupulous interlopers, like I mentioned, the Japanese person or some Chinese person, some Indian person talking about, oh, we're all from Africa, therefore give me your land, give me your minerals, give me your resources, because we're all from Africa, so you don't own it. I mean, what a hustle. I mean, how can any person in their right mind not see that that's just a con job? Our enemies created the one drop rule. They didn't want to acknowledge their own children. They raped women. They raped mulattoes and then said they're black too. I don't see that as aggression. And you want to accept it, and not only accept it, you get all warm and fuzzy when you see like a Beyonce or a Mariah Carey say, oh, I'm black. Non-African people know full well that at present African people are the least respected genocultural group on the planet, so they are seeking to fulfill a need to feel superior to someone through a sexual encounter. Okay? This is why they seek out weak-minded Negroes for sex. Sex is one of the most vulnerable situations, psychologically and spiritually, a victim of this assault can engage in. So these demons seek out Africans because they have a sense of inferiority. See, we don't ever think about that. We say, oh, this great non-African person, this great white person wants me. But we don't ever think that they might be fucking insane. I'm sorry, excuse my language. They might be insane. They might be out of their mind. Or they might have a sense of inferiority in their own group. Or they're just perverted and lustful. They want to satisfy their sexual fetishes. We don't ever think that. We think they're just there, oh, for good reasons. They're going to brighten our lives. The African genocultural group is under no obligation through this type of sick behavior to accept the offspring as part of our genocultural group any more than other genocultural groups. And this is a problem of power that I mentioned before. We have not defined, we have not put laws and legal strictures in place. So now let's look at these Hispanics or Latinos, because we have to define this. Hispanic simply means a person who speaks Spanish. It is not a racial classification. Spain is in Europe, so Hispanics are white people. Okay, when they came to Central and South America, they imposed their language on the people who were there. Then they engaged in massive hybridization through sex and rape. And this creates a psychological disposition in which the victims want to identify with their victimizer. Okay? They seek to relate in an intimate way with the genocultural group that represents power and control in the imposed society. Latino is a Spanish word and it means Latin. And Latin is another European language. So both of these terms refer to Europe. and more specifically European language. They have nothing to do with the heritage culture of the people who were in the Americas when these demons showed up. Today, in this population, since those who speak Spanish in the Americas are from various origins like Africa, Europe, and the indigenous nations that were in existence when these demons showed up, it cannot be said that these people are a distinct race. In fact, the archetypical Latino or Hispanic is a hybrid who was conditioned in a false consciousness to identify with a colonial culture that was cultivated by European settler conquerors. Now, some people in this group have retained their indigenous language and cultural practice, but for racist reasons, they're labeled Latino or Hispanic. This further stimulates the Utama Rojo I spoke of before, that the term white supremacy stimulates in Europeans. They have a sense of comfort knowing that the language, the language reflects their worldview and identity. Okay? Now, I further talk about the economic and political reality that these concepts have imposed, such as being prisoners of this social construct. They're reliant on keeping people with this colonial construct, this psychological colonial construct, so they can access the raw materials. I'm talking about the Europeans are reliant on that. They want cheap labor, they want consumption markets. Okay? So even though some of these hybrids have reproduced themselves to the degree that they could be a distinct race, they haven't organized themselves in such a way because they cannot gain access to their resources exclusively. Okay? So that is actually the result, the outcome of rampant hybridization. You have a culture, you have an entity that cannot organize because nobody knows who anyone is and everyone identifies with the oppressor, and so they support the economic system which enriches the people in the oppressor class. This is another important reason why people should not engage in interracial hybrid production through sexual congress with non-African people. Let's talk about the Arabs. They're a hybridized group, but they were able to organize themselves into a genocultural group over a millennia and a half ago. Okay? Through a political theological institution that you know as Islam. Some of you convert to it because you think it's the black man's original religion. I mean, one of the most insane Negroes I ever encounter are usually Muslim. Anyone who would convert to this religion is certifiably insane, in my opinion. Period. Including Malcolm X. All of them. Once you do the research on this thing, on this religion, you would have to be out of your mind to convert to it. But the Arabs used it to organize themselves because it works for them, not you, Negro. There are hybrids in the Arab population, but they are historical hybrids, what I call the intergenerational hybrid. When these white groups from the caves invaded Kemet. Or some of them are recent hybrids created when these Arab degenerates kidnapped African women and raped them and then produced some hybrid. Like that guy, they called him Bandar Bush, who was buddies with the Bush family, and his name was Prince Bandar. He was I believe, a diplomat from Saudi Arabia to the United States. Look him up. Bandar, Prince Bandar. They called him Bandar Bush. He's a recent hybrid. His mother was a kidnapped African Sudanese. They create these hybrids and they're used to oppress Africans in Africa and promote the expansion of Arab nationalism that you call Islam. Now, the Arabs know that these hybrids are not Arabs. In fact, Prince Bandar was later ostracized from the royal family because they said, you a hybrid, you ain't actually in this group. Your father had a sexual degeneracy that we accepted for a while and we used you, and now that relationship is over, so get out, hybrid. That's how they do. That's how power works. It is a psychological phenomenon that is a result of both hybridization and power relationships being enforced by the Arabs on their black African victims, which compels the hybrids' fealty to the white Arab dominators. These hybrids see the true Africans as powerless, so even though they are mistreated by their father's genocultural group, they feel the power that is available and the superior social and economic position they have as an Arab-identified hybrid gives them the motivation to mistreat Africans in a brutal way for their father's people. So since these two groups, the Arabs and the Hispanic/Latinos, are organized for white power, and whites have used sexual predatory practices to attack their victims and consolidate their control, it does not mean hybrids are white, nor does it mean that their non-white status is a basis for solidarity with Africans. This is a major historical point that Africans have missed. We refuse to accept it, or we have been deliberately miseducated from knowing this. This brings about the massive confusion about this matter, so that you can't even talk about this now. You bring it up, people react, they're triggered. What you saying? What do you mean? You mean Malcolm X ain't black? What about W.E.B. Du Bois? What about Steph Curry? What do you mean they ain't black? They blacker than you. They did more for black, and all this stupid stuff that doesn't make any sense. We are not the world's sexual toilet and dumping ground. Even to broach this subject will result in emotional outburst and vicious name-calling instead of calm deliberation and effective implementation of proper provisions that would protect the African genome. Adam Clayton Powell did more for black people than you. What did you do for black people? You ain't doing nothing. No, they black, man. What do you mean? She black. She got one black parent. The other parent's Latino, but she black. She down with us. She identified with us. Yeah, okay. And then get back in the bedroom with your little hybrid love doll. I got you, brother. I have a radical position about this. See, we need to re-examine the definition of species. I think the definition of the human species is incorrect, and is specifically culturally derived from European cultural structure thought, and it serves the political purposes and quest for power of Europeans. Because before we were animals, we were subhuman, we were 3/5 human, but now all of a sudden we're all part of the human family. Why did they change? Was it any scientific discovery that was made? No. It was political. The main criterion for Europeans arguing that now humans are one species and there is no such thing as race is that different genocultural groups or these, quote, non-existing races can breed with each other. Hence, if two biological entities can procreate, it supports the likelihood that they are part of the same species, whereas if two biological entities cannot breed, for example, a cat and a bird, then they are two different species. This notion is absurd. It is a political tactic used to destroy the genome of African people by claiming that because we can breed, we're the part of the same species, so therefore you should have rampant interracial breeding. It's to destroy you. It's political, it's not scientific. Far too much emphasis has been placed on this breeding criterion and the fact that whites and blacks, for instance, can have hybrid children, and therefore there is no difference other than skin color between us. So we should not see color and see all as human. But let's examine our African worldview. What was our conceptual approach to reality? Well, Dr. Marimba Ani has studied this in her book Urugu. Dr. Mwalimu Baruti has studied this also. We can see that the African worldview and traditional African societies, the Africans never posited the idea that people were born human. Human beings had to be developed through education and socialization, and upon successful completion of this process, then the status of human was imparted upon an individual within the African social cultural context. It was not simply bestowed because one was born of a Homo sapiens sapiens, male and female. This is a distinct difference that exposes the cultural nature of European scientific classification and its purposes. Africans, Europeans, Asians, Amerindians, other hybridized people constitute different species of the human family. Family being a taxonomic term, a biological grouping. Not the emotionally laden image of mom and hugs from your grandmother that the colloquial use of family generates. No, we are not attempting to create some shiny, happy people reality. We have interests. Other genocultural groups have interests, and we have different destinies. The Amerindian nations of North America had a different destiny than the Cynic East Asians from which they were extracted. This fact is still present today, but with all this universalist and globalist rhetoric, we can't see it. We get confused. We want to be multicultural. We want to have mixed families. We want to be a Benetton commercial. We want to be like they show on TV. You're being manipulated. I need to realize these realities that we have not been taught, that should be taught in a real African-centered or an educational program who has aims and goals to empower and continue the survival of African people. My main point is that if two species or types of humans from two separate and distinct genocultural groups procreate, it stands to logic that the offspring is neither one nor the other genocultural group and thereby constitutes a new genocultural entity that must proceed to either develop a cohesive group with other hybrids or must disappear back into one of the other parents' genocultural groups. Look at the colored population in Tanzania. Look at the Arabs, the Hispanic Latinos. This definitive difference in genocultures will remain until one or more are exterminated. Now, I'm not advocating this, but it's a possibility. So under these conditions, for Africans to help promote and accelerate this process by claiming that all hybrids with one African parent are African and are not either a separate genocultural group or are not African because or are not part of their other parents' genocultural group, this is a recipe for extinction and assisted suicide or assisted genocide. We cannot continue in the world coming into fruition to hold these slave mentalities, these colonial mentalities that were created by the colonial enslavers. We must resolve ourselves to say, okay, this person is an African, these people are African, these are the people who are going to be in power, these are people who have to be developed so that we can have a powerful nation state on the continent of Africa that we control the social, economic, and political reality of. That is the goal. The goal is not ending racism. The goal is not sleeping your way to freedom with every non-African person you can get your hands on or who says yes to you. The goal is building power, building a subcontinental nation state of African people with African leaders on the order of a Russia or a China or Iran or Japan or the United States that can politically and economically sanction enemies and reward its constituents. So I urge you to go to the Lumumba Afrika report. I'll put a link in the description. I thank you for listening. I'll be back with another installment in this series of the Son of Ahset commentary. Kwaherini.